The federal government of Nigeria has initiated the COVID-19 Rapid Response Register with an emergency intervention database for the urban poor made poorer by the pandemic. No fewer than 1 million Nigerians are to receive 5,000 naira monthly for a period of 6 months to cushion the socio-economic impact of the novel virus on the urban poor in the 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory. According to the Vice President, Professor Osinbajo, the project is a national initiative to build a shock-responsive framework for capturing and registering the urban poor, designed to focus mainly on wards that have been selected using scientifically validated methods of satellite remote sensing technology, machine learning algorithm, and big data analysis. The target groups are small businesses, street vendors, and petty traders, as well as low-wage employed individuals and families. It also covers construction workers earning daily wages and other forms of daily wage-based activities, employees of businesses involved in services, and workers in different industries and manufacturing firms. Other persons covered will include taxi drivers, street dwellers, orphans, vulnerable children, people living with disabilities, and vulnerable families living in slum areas. Here to speak further on this project is APERE, the National Coordinator, National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office at the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and Social Development. APERE, thank you for joining us. Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show. Hello, APERE, are you with us? Yes, thank you for joining us. Well, the Vice President...
Yes, thank you very much.
The Vice President recently launched a COVID-19 cash transfer program for the urban poor. Now, could you tell us what the objective of this is and who constitutes the urban poor? And how is this new initiative under the National Social Safety Net program of the Nigerian government, how is it different from what was done in April 2020 at the height of the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in Nigeria?
Thank you very much, Ruben, and glad to be with you again on the Sunday show. The federal government, through the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and Social Development, initiated a rapid response register for COVID-19 cash transfer targeting the urban poor, those who are, in your words, made poorer by the pandemic. Perhaps I'll start my answer from your last question. How is it different from the regular cash transfer? Now, the regular cash transfer of the federal government paying 10,000 naira every 2 months over a period of time which started in 2017 and is still ongoing. And at the time of the pandemic in April, the Mr. President had directed that we should pay 2 months in arrears of that particular program, which we went ahead to pay poor and vulnerable Nigerians who were already identified 20,000 naira. Now, that cash transfer is taken from the National Social Register. The National Social Register itself has been developed over a period of time, focusing on the poorest communities. And when you look at it, our poorest communities are mostly those who are rural. And now when the pandemic hit, the most affected were our urban poor, the regular daily income earners. And you will recall that the federal government went ahead to lock down Lagos, lock down Abuja, and other hotspots. And so when it did happen, those who were more affected were the urban poor, at which time we had not yet reached the development of the social register in the urban political world. And so very quickly, the Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Sadia Omar Farouk, initiated the Rapid Response Register targeting this urban poor. And in itself, like you rightly say, we're using satellite remote sensing technology, first to map the urban political world. Now, Ruben, you know that we have about 8,600 political wards in the country. 2,600 of those are urban political wards as defined by the National Population Commission and the Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria. Now, when you look at those political wards, what we then did with the technology and the data we had was to then look at it and then further categorize this urban political wards from the poor to the poorest, targeting those areas, like you also said in your word, slum areas where the urban poor are most concentrate. And that is what we're doing this, and that is the major difference. Why the irregular cash transfer, it's targeting the rural poor. Starting from the rural poor and working its way up, this particular program is targeting the urban poor that resides in our urban areas.
Well, APERE, I would like to ask you, because I'm personally confused. The Vice President is talking about Rapid Response Register. Your office talks about National Social Register. What is the difference between both? And who constitutes the urban poor or the rural poor? And how does your office, the National Social Safety Net Office, define who is urban poor and who is rural poor?
Okay, so the National Social Register, it's in itself an information gateway to potential eligible beneficiaries into any social intervention programs. And for the government of Nigeria, we chose to use what you call a community-based targeting system to raise the poor and vulnerable in our communities. Now, the community-based targeting system is simply a system where the community themselves define what they mean by poverty within the context of that community. And once they do that, they go ahead to identify the poor amongst them. These are the people that come into the social registry. Now, when the pandemic struck, it was a crisis situation. And in a crisis situation, there are emergency approaches to interventions. And what the federal government thought was to quickly raise a platform that would use a very scientific means to quickly target people into the register. Now, the Rapid Response Register is going to sit as a subset of the National Social Register. The whole vision, post this crisis and things return to normal, the state teams will then go back to these urban areas where they have identified the people into the Rapid Response Register and validate their information and bring them back into the National Social Register. Now, the major difference is the National Social Register will take information of the entire family. We take it from the point of view of the household. And we enumerate the head of the household, the caregiver or the woman in the house or the wife, and the children. We must cite them. We take their biodata and their details of their vocation and other details or other parameters that qualifies or describe the person's wealth. Now, with the Rapid Response Register, and as the name connotes, it's a rapid register in itself that just quickly and rapidly raises these numbers of individuals onto the register. Now, in this sense, we are now targeting only the head of the household, but taking other bulk point information from the household. Now, when you define the urban poor, these are the transient poor. These are people who live in our poor urban areas or peri-urban areas. So you look at bricklayers, you look at daily income earners, you look at the unemployed, you look at people who are daily wage earners, cleaners. I mean, the hotel the place we're sitting here as your studio had a huge number of employees, most of them who were gardeners, some of them who were drivers and cooks, etc. At the lockdown of the economy where business was no longer as it was, There were a lot of people who lost their jobs, who lost their daily income, daily earnings, and went back home and are sitting home. There are the people on your street, the corner of your street, that sell akara every morning, or sell pap, or sell in Lagos the popular agege bread and ewa beans. Those that sell agbo and those other people, most of them now, I'm very sure we are relating with this story that we cannot see them on the corners of our street anymore, because when the pandemic hit and we closed the economy for 4 months, what then happened was these people went back home. They consumed what they had as their stock, i.e. the akara seller went back home and used the beans, the stock of beans that he had, to feed her family, and there was the small money that she had. When we opened back the economy, she didn't have the money to go back to the market, get beans, and start back selling akara. Now, these are the people the government is targeting.
Well,
now, with this register, it makes it now a complete whole. We have a register for rural poor. We have a register for urban poor. Well,
APERE, this is not new. I mean, we know it's not rocket science. Countries across the world try to help people who have been impacted by COVID-19 and who have lost, a lot as a result of the pandemic. In the UK, they had the Follow scheme. In Brazil, they were giving out money to people, even if Jair Bolsonaro, the president, now says they have no money to give anymore. In the United States, there's that debate about the stimulus package. Here in Nigeria, we have the Economic Sustainability Program. Now, what is being done this time around in the last 7 or 8 days has been done before in 2020. And it was very controversial. Nigerians raised questions about the National Social Register. They say, who are the people on that register? It looked at that time that persons from a certain part of the country dominated the register. The question was also asked. There was a school feeding program at that time. Schools were shut down, and yet the minister, your principal, Shadia Farouk Umar, was saying that students were fed, students who were not in school. Now, this time around, are we going to have school feeding program? What is different? And then there's this talk about distributing sanitary pads to women. Are we going to do that this time around out of this 5,000? And how did government arrive at 5,000 naira for 6 months? What is the logic in that?
Thank you, Ruben. As you rightly say, countries all over the world are doing several initiatives targeting the most affected by the pandemic. Now, in terms of crisis of this magnitude, there's a three-stage intervention that any country or any government will do. First, the relief. Now, the relief ranges from anywhere from 1 month to 6 months to slightly above 6 months towards a year. And this relief, in most cases, and 100% of the cases, is either through cash or through food. When crisis hit, the most affected people must be fed. People are hungry. So what is the minimum that could put food on the table for a very poor person out there on the street? Now, this is the entire idea of the Rapid Response Register COVID-19 cash transfer as an immediate relief intervention. Now, there are other interventions in the second category that you call the transition period of a crisis. That's where you're moving your poor or those who are affected from a relief or putting food or smoothing consumption towards a bit of livelihood. That's where you start with cash grants. I mean, the survivor fund. You see the federal government through the central bank giving small loans to small businesses, to start by small businesses, etc., and other programs of the government that are going on at the moment. So this is now a cash transfer that's meant to put food at a minimum on the table of the poor people. Now, I give an example of somebody who sells akara on the street or any of our streets that has been without her daily income for 4 months. Now, you give her 5,000 naira. Study has said that she's going to use evidence from the program we're doing here in Nigeria, shows that she's going to use 68% of that to feed herself, and about 20% of that for investment, which is putting her back into her business. Now, when you pay 5,000 consistently for 6 months. That is 30,000 naira per person. But more importantly, the cash transfer is also used to then begin to unlock our economy. We are looking at 5,000 naira for 1 million people every month. That is that's about 1 billion naira every other month, right? About that, 500 million or so every month. And now, when you look at it, that is about 1 billion injected into the economy at once and to our rural economy. Now, evidence shows that this 1 billion naira, about 68% of it we used to buy food. And now you will just relax back in your chair and look at the math and the impact of that on our local markets in terms of increasing demand, but in terms of also enhancing businesses of small business holders, including those who sell Indomie rice and all of that. So it's a strategic way of gradually unlocking the economy. That's why countries like UK, that's why countries like US are also looking at this stimulus package for their people. It's not only a stimulus package to relieve individuals of that burden, but also gradually unlocking the economy. So you look at it from that perspective, it's an investment in the right direction. Now, when the pandemic struck, the school feeding program, what the government did was a dry food ration. Again, in your words, Ruben, it's a global best practice. Globally, it's either you're feeding with cooked food in schools or you're giving dry food rations to the students. Yes, the schools were closed. Yes, the students were not going back to school, going to school, but they were still students. They were still in our houses, in our communities. Now we know them. Now you all are aware of the debate in the UK over the school feeding program, as when the pandemic struck, whether they should continue feeding the students in dry food ration or cooked food. The debate still ranges on globally. And so what Nigeria did was simply, as part of the global best practice, and because we also had the stock of food around the country, so when they closed down, the Honorable Minister, in her wisdom, and wisely so, decided that, look, and with, of course, the approval of her principals herself, because not only her decision, decided that let's make use of the food that we have in stock and not allow it waste. Let's start a dry food ration to put food on the table for these students to still eat. Let's also not allow these aggregators that buy eggs or milk or oil or all of that for these students. Let's not allow their income go to waste, because at that time we closed down. These people have already bought crates of eggs, bags of beans, etc. to supply to the school feeding program. So if we had not done that dry food ration, it meant all of that would have been a waste. That would be a heavier blow to our economy than taking the right approach to a dry food ration. Now that we're coming back and the economy is reopening, the whole home school feeding program is being revamped. At the moment, we are about to go back to the schools that have resumed to start back the program. Even though there's also indications everywhere, in some states, schools have now reopened, in other states who are open. And those schools who have reopened, the school feeding program continues, just like every other business of government.
Well, I mean, the next question to ask is, what measures are you taking in your office as the national coordinator of Nigeria's social safety nets to make sure that what we witnessed last year does not happen this time around as we face a second wave? Many of those food palliatives that you talked about ended up in warehouses that NSAS protesters went and liberated. They ended up as items in the hands of politicians who were reserving them for their birthday parties. And all of that is in the public domain. But I also asked you about the feminization of poverty, which seems to be at the heart of the initiative. Now, already this 5,000 naira that you are giving out, there is also a 20,000 naira grant. It has started in Katsina State. It has also started, well, it first started in Katsina State, I hope advisedly. And then this week, there was an event in Lagos State also. Now, is this not the feminization of poverty at the heart of this? Is the face of poverty in Nigeria feminine?
Not at all. Within the context, not at all, but we all know that our caregivers are women in our families. They look after us, literally. But that not to say that it is feminine or you are placing gender issues into an initiative like that. Now, let's start with the question of the definition of poverty. We know poverty is relative. I mean, you can define poverty from the point of view of income and the kind of income you earn. I mean, from the point of view of the National Living Standard Survey, we say those who are earning below $1.03 are considered poor within that definition and the context that's looking at it from the economy. But what we do with the social register is to gather the community members, wherein the community will divide themselves into 3 groups, 1 female, 1 male group, and 1 youth group. These 3 groups will define what poverty meant within their context. And there are very, very interesting definitions. And we are also doing a compendium of definition of poverty in the eyes of those who are poor. So you see, in a village, they will tell you that when 10 people are living in 1 round hut, that means they can't afford housing. That means they are poor. Or they sit on a piece of land, but yet they cannot farm that piece of land, and they are leasing it out to others to hire, so that they will have money to feed themselves. It means they are poor. Or if you see in that house, in that round hut, smoke comes out of that round hut only once a day in the evening when everybody's around. That means they cannot afford 3 square meals and they are feeding once a day. Now, that will be a definition within the context of that community. And when they define that, we'll tell them, okay, identify those who are poor and vulnerable within your community. For the rapid response register, we're defining it in terms of the daily income earners or wage earners. Those who earn relatively low, who depend on their going out every day, otherwise they will not earn a dime. There are not like paid workers who will go to work end of the month, you pay them. There are people that if they don't come out today, they will not earn a living. That taxi driver that was, when the economy was closed down, couldn't come out to go to where he has a higher purchase car, or to the big man who has a car where he will take it for a day to drive around, make the money, go back and settle the owner and have a small change for him to feed his family. That Okada rider that couldn't go to do that, or that wheelbarrow pusher that stands in the front of the market and goes to that shop that has 100 wheelbarrows a day, that he collects it for a day, he goes out, he carries his goods, and then he goes back and settles the person and collect. Those are the people we are targeting here. We are targeting those who could not go out, who were affected by that, daily income earners, as defined. Those who do not have jobs, those who are vulnerable even by the nature of their made. Now, persons living with disability, for instance. Now, we had quite a number of them. If you go to our streets in Lagos, Kaduna, everywhere, we see them on the street begging. Even at that time that we closed the economy because nobody was moving around, these people couldn't even come out to beg. These are the people we are targeting.
Well, you are
within that context, we're defining poverty in that context of vulnerability.
Well, you are APERE, this is your job. You are the Nigerian official in charge of the social safety nets for Nigerians. But Nigerians are saying the last time that your office embarked on this same path, many Nigerians said they don't know anybody who collected money or any student who ate any food anywhere. What is the guarantee? What measures do you have in place to ensure that this time around, Nigerians will be able to say, at least this man benefited from Nigeria's social safety net, or that there is actually a national social safety net in place, and that it is not structured to benefit certain parts of the country or favor certain persons? I know, if you ask me, in 10 minutes, I can give you 1,000 names of persons who should fall under the category of urban poor or rural poor. But I don't know anybody who has benefited anything in terms of this social safety net from the Nigerian government. In the US, it's not so difficult. People get the checks and they say, oh, I've received so amount from the United States government. Why is it so opaque in Nigeria?
This time around, it's an electronic end-to-end. Even at that time, there's still evidence about who collects and who do not collect, because for every community that we pay, the list of beneficiaries is displayed publicly, typed and pasted on the community center where you can cite it. Now, in this time around, government is doing an electronic end-to-end. Every single individual, every single one of the 1 million people we pay through their bank account, and they will have bank alerts. Now, when Mr. Vice President flagged the program of 3,115 Nigerians got the cash transfer. These individuals live in Ikorodu for Lagos, Ikorodu, Ijade 2, and Aguro in Lagos. In Abuja here, people who were in Gui political ward and Kerishi, those individuals go, because that's where we piloted the technology of electronic end-to-end. Those individuals collected the money, they have the text messages, their text alert, and was shown. Some shared with the state offices. Now, for every single individual, for this rapid response register, we are not only taking their bank account, we're taking their geo-coordinates. The geo-coordinates locate this individual, and this is also on our Google, that it's online. Now, with the right access, we can also grant you the right approvals to cite. Now, there is something that we also need to clarify. Now, the data security laws will not allow us to publicly display not only the data security law, but more importantly, everybody, every individual, whether poor or rich, has the right to his or her privacy and dignity. So, because the government is paying them cash transfer, we will not just go ahead and publicly publish their names. We'll be going against their dignity or right to their secrecy. I mean, just like to prove that Stanbic IBTC Bank that I bank gives mortgage loans. I will ask Stanbic that to prove that they give mortgage loan, they must print the names of those who they've given mortgage to. I would not like to see my name in a paper like that. This is just a simple example around that. But I urge every Nigerian, for the National Social Register, at the moment, Ruben, when I came here last, the National Social Register was only on 2.6 million poor and vulnerable households. Today, the National Social Register is 6 million poor and vulnerable households across 97,000 communities, 506 local governments in the country. To every community, this 96,000 communities, Ruben, there's a community list domiciled in that community. And if you go on our website, you will see the list of communities. You just need to take a right to that community to cite the community list. At that stage, the community is giving you the list at their own volition, and so you can cite it. So it is completely public, it's traceable, it's auditable, it's electronic end-to-end. You can trace where the money, when it left the government account to that individual account, because it is electronic, and you can trace it, you can find it with the right approvals to access based on the data security laws.
Well, the Vice President, when he launched this program, he was saying that it is technology-driven, and he was talking about geoscience mapping, I don't remember the exact word again, and something about algorithm and all of that. So how do you determine who is the urban poor or the rural poor? By just using Google Map. And then you said that the register is available. That register, can you guide us, this National Social Register, where we can find it and where we can do the auditing that you talk about?
Okay, so the Vice President was right. It is electronic end-to-end using scientific methods of remote sensing. Let me just give a slight example. Now, when you look at the satellite imagery of a particular town, say Nigeria, you will see places like here in Abuja, you will see places like Maitama with well-structured streets, really structured housing, well-spaced. But when you look at the same satellite imagery in a place like Dutse Alhaji, you see that the houses are very closely packed together. You can hardly make out the streets. You can even hardly make out whether they have street lights. They will not even have street lights. Whereas in a place like Maitama, you can see clearly on the map that they have street lights, they have good roads, their less are structured. So it's so easy to, within that imagery, to identify and separate that this is perhaps, this is an urban, this is a rural, an urban poor area, but this is an area with more rich folks or middle income earners. And then when you take back the National Living Standards Survey that the Bureau of Statistics did, that mapped the country from the poorest to the poor to the poorest state. You know, it was categorized by that, using empirical evidence and data coming from the field, from each Nigerian that they took that study from. Using those data, we're able to exactly identify the urban areas. I started here by telling you that we have 8,000 political wards. 2,600 of those political wards are classified urban. And the classification of urban is as defined by our Bureau of Statistics, by our National Population Commission. These are the two bodies that deal mostly with our population figures and our data that defines it. Now, when you talk about access to the register is domiciled at our office. And the register is accessible after duly signing an agreement with us that defines what you want to use the information for. We owe it a duty and an obligation to those who come into the register to protect their dignity and their right to secrecy. Now, when we take this information, we don't only take the information of the individual in terms of name, sex, and your biodata. We take information with even his assets, the kind of room he sleeps in, the kind of toilet facility he uses, the kind of cooking fuel he uses, the kind of water he drinks. Every single information, because the data is important for government for planning. In most states now, states are using that database to cite projects like electricity project, water project, schools, clinics, etc. We take all of this information of this individual. So the data is available. You sign an agreement with us, you have access to this data. However, our website, www.naps.org, has the aggregate figures. Now, these aggregate figures will tell you total number of households on the register, which is 6 million, like I said. Total number of individuals on the register, 25 million individuals on the register. And just to say that the total estimated poor Nigerians is 89 million. The social register houses already 25 million of those people. That's close to about 30% of total poor people in this country. We are having a rich database here. Now, it will also show you each political ward. So I know that for Lagos State, Lagos is building the register in all of its local government. I know the total number of political wards that the register has been developed in. And all of this is accessible for you. The only thing you will not get access to is the individual data of the person when you go to our site. And those individual data of people, it's accessible after duly signed agreement. Like I said, the social register then becomes a database that anybody or any organization, government, donor agencies or non-government agencies will come and mine. For instance, the UN Women recently mined data of 20,000 poor and vulnerable women, household headed by women. Those are widows. And they are giving them cash transfer and providing them business skills to set them up on businesses. What? UNDP recently mined 100,000 from this social register, and they are also paying them cash transfers. Well, so many organizations, UNICEF, Save the Children, and all of that mine from this register to go ahead to pay the poor and vulnerable or do whatever other interventions. And like the Vice President said, for the first time now, we're beginning to have a database that we can start very transparently. A social security system like you have elsewhere in the UK, in the US, and other places. We have the database now. We know our poor people, like Mr. President said in his democracy speech of 2019. Well, we know them by their names. We know them by their location, where they live, and we can
APERE, I'm sure you will understand
security system to pay this people.
APERE, I'm sure you understand why Nigerians are concerned. Because this is Nigerian money to be given out to Nigerians. And if you are going to define poor people, Nigerians will be interested. In the first case, you said this is technology-driven, and it will be based this time around on bank accounts. In 2020, we saw federal government officials handing out cash. So if it's going to be bank accounts based, technology driven this time, how about the rural poor who do not have bank accounts? How do they get covered? That's one. Secondly, you talked about using technology to determine population density in certain areas. You'll be surprised that some of the richest people in Lagos are in Agege, which will give you on Google Map a lot of density. And some of the poorest people are in Ikoyi and Victoria Island, which will not give you a lot of density. But during NSAS protests in 2020, we discovered that there are, in fact, more poor people in Etiosa local government than in Ogba local government or Ifakoijayi in Lagos. So questions are likely to be raised about the methodology that your office has adopted to define urban poor and rural poor, and how your methodology may have excluded people who actually need this social safety net. What do you say to that?
The beauty of science and evidence is that, facts don't lie, and you will challenge facts, but you will still come back to the same thing. Now, when you look at Etiosa, you look at Ogba, you look at Victoria Island, you are right, there are poor people there. And when you look at those satellite imagery, you can clearly see, and we are not saying you use only the satellite imagery. You remember we also use other statistical data. I mentioned the National Living Standards Survey that mapped close to 2,200 enumeration areas in Nigeria to estimate the degree of poverty across the country and across our state. So we used a lot of data to come up with this. But to be exact, we are up to 2.5 kilometer reduced accuracy, scientifically proven, to determining these geographical areas with urban poor. Now, when you give example of Victoria Island, from satellite imagery, you will see the slums around Victoria Island will show you very clearly. But when you go back to taking other data or evidences around these communities, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly where these are. Now, how do we then pick or identify these people? Now, we are doing a huge investment in communication and sensitization and advocacy around the whole country through all the political words that have been picked. And we will solicit response from residents of such identified communities through SMS to identify themselves and come up onto the platform. The next thing we're doing is we're going back to the state office now. For every state of the federation, there's a state operations and coordinating unit manned by a civil servant in the Ministry of Planning, reporting to the Permanent Secretary of Planning. These are offices started with the responsibility of enumeration. Now, when we identify these people through this tech process, they will go back into the field and validate this individual in the places they say they reside, where we got the information. They will get their bank account number, they will get their geo coordinates that identify their location, where they are, where anybody can trace. We are also working with civil society organizations to do a back check. So if we have the register, they take a sample and they will go back to identifying that this individual is indeed in this location where he is, because they have the geo-coordinates. And with geo-coordinates now, with a simple phone, when you plug the geo-coordinates of any location, just like your Google Maps that we use for our taxis or we use to locate any office, once you put the geo-coordinates there, it takes you direct to the house of that individual and you can confirm the information for yourself. Now, to those individuals without bank accounts, even in the urban poor, you find out that there are places, there are people who will have bank accounts. From the pilot that we did in Lagos and Abuja, of the 10,000 identified individuals, when we validated the information, about 86% of them have bank accounts. The rest didn't have bank accounts. What is the fallback plan? The fallback plan is that you are asked, we are working with the state teams, are working with some banks who have volunteered to give zero credit accounts. Some are saying a visual account for these individuals. So we link them up, they give them bank accounts, and we take it on. After 2 or 3 days, they communicate the account number back to the state teams and we plug it in. Now, the cash transfer that was going on before this time, that you had rightly quoted that we're handing out cash. After that incident, the Honorable Minister directed that the cash transfer must be digitized. Now, in some areas, it has been some bit of quiet on the cash transfer. It's all in the move of digitization. So what we have done through the social register and the information that we collect information around financial institutions and the proximity of a bank to the poor and vulnerable households that we have collected information in every community in Nigeria. Now, we've mapped them to those communities who have bank accounts around a 5-kilometer radius of the community. Those who have banks about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers, and we are mapping them and we're starting to put them through digitizing the cash transfer payment and giving them access to bank accounts. Also in line with the financial inclusion campaign of the federal government.
Well, APERE, before we go, we have just about a minute to go. This morning, I've had your office quoting 1 billion naira, the office of the vice president talking about 729 billion naira. Where is the money going to come from? Is it in the budget, or is money that we're going to look for, as the vice president suggested? Quickly, briefly.
The monies have been appropriated for the 1 million cash transfer, COVID-19 cash transfer. The money has been provided for through the economic sustainability plan. We all recall close to the end of last year, the federal government approved an economic sustainability plan, a budget. And in that budget, the 1 million cash transfer, in fact, 32.5 billion naira is allocated for the COVID-19 cash transfer to 1 million people. And if you calculate it, 5,000 per month over 6 months to 1 million people, amounts to 30 billion naira. The 2.5 billion naira is to handle the registration process using the scientific means that we have talked about, and the other processes of monitoring and managing that cash transfer. So you see that from the 32 billion, 30 billion is going directly to the people. Now, the other monies has also been appropriated for. The cash transfer for rural women has been duly provided for.
Well, thank you very much, APERE. Thank you very much, APERE. I get your point about appropriation. Thank you very much.